Hey Addicts, welcome back to another game review. This time we're talking about Days Gone. Now I've been really looking forward to talking about this because this game got review bombed hard before it even came out. So I kind of wanted to do this. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper. I'm going to try not to make it too long because I think there's some issues that people called pretty good, and then there's other things that I think need to be brought to light. So we're going to break it down probably more typically how we do it. We're going to start with the story. So the story, it starts off really choppy. I was like, wait a second, did we skip a cinematic here? It does have some awkward cuts in them. You can clearly tell stuff was cut out. I know back early before the game release, they had a mechanism where you could choose, kind of like a choice system where you could choose whether to do one thing or the other. Sorry, I just explained a choice system. I know that's stupid. Anyway, and you can clearly tell they cut some of that out, and it's, I think story-wise, it's fine because, it still makes sense, but the way it flows into that, it's like a menu was supposed to pop up, but they're like, oh, we're just going to cut that out. So it feels like a really sudden cut in the cinematic. So it kind of jolts you a little bit. Now I will say, the story stuff is a bit generic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I will say one of the things that I instantly liked about the story is the main character, Deacon St. John. That is played by Sam Witwer, which I have been a fan of. I played the Force Unleashed games. I watched him in the Clone Wars. I think he does he has acting chops, and I think for what character Deacon is, I think he plays him really well. And even, with the other characters, they are good in their own right, but they are much more elevated by the actors behind them, and because of that, it's able to make the story have a little bit more depth and love to it. Plain and simply, I will say, if I had to sum Deacon in one sentence, he's kind of like a slightly unhinged asshole with a heart of gold. He kind of talks to himself like a crazy person. He has a unhealthy obsession with freakers, but he does still want to do some good in the world. So he's a really complex character. There's a lot of back and forth with him. He helps people, but he's kind of a dick to everybody that he meets, always pulling a gun on them. So I really enjoy that. Some people may not like that kind of character, but I think for, what kind of world it's in, it makes sense, and I do appreciate that, given the character's history. Now, we're going to get into some world and setting stuff. This is going to be kind of a mixture of graphics. Speaking of the world, it is a beautiful world. It's definitely, I would say, earns the title of being called, on the current gen platform. It doesn't look like a previous gen game. But I will say, you can definitely tell it doesn't look as good as it could be when you get into the photo mode. There's just some stuff about, I don't know, it's like the filter or like the lighting in some issues, and maybe the detail pops a little bit in certain issues. We'll get a little bit more onto that in the performance section, but I will say photo mode makes it look a lot better when you so if you see pictures of it, it's not quite what it looks like in game. But I just wanted to mention that. I saw a lot of people talking about the world being empty, and after playing the game for close to 40 hours already, I don't know what they're talking about, because there's plenty of stuff to do. It retains the feel of a post-apocalyptic world. It's empty where it needs to be. It feels desolate. But there's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of factions roaming around. You got the freakers that, I would say is in good number for, a handful here and there. But you also have to worry about the hordes because they move around. There's some that are stuck to certain locations. There's nests in, different parts of rural, or not rural, but, populated or building areas. And then, you got the military, or at least their form of the military that's still around. You have all of these different marauders and drifters, as they call them, which is different, basically a different enemy faction. And then you also have like the survivors, the people that you actually deal with. So there's plenty of stuff to do, and some stuff might feel a little repetitive in terms of the gameplay because it is kind of like a rinse and repeat type thing. But I think for what we're going over in the gameplay section, you can kind of see why it's still enjoyable. One thing I do want to touch on still about the world is the trust system. I think this is a cool concept, and I love something like this in a post-apocalyptic world. Especially like a zombie thing. I've always kind of wanted something like this where, you have a camp and maybe you don't live there, but you help them out and you have to gain trust. And that's something that is done through, like killing zombies or I'm sorry, freakers for the community, or like helping them, bring more people into their community or helping them out with jobs. So I really like that mechanic, and I think it works pretty well. The other thing I will say is the convos that you have in the camps. I really do like that. It brings it a little bit more to life. When you go to merchants and stuff, they're not just somebody there being like, hey, I have wares. What can I sell you, sir? They kind of have their own little dialogue that they share back and forth, even when you're in the menus. If you go in the menu, they'll start talking. You can hear a conversation between them as you're buying your stuff, which is really cool to hear, what's going on in the camp, or, what's going on in the story that you're able to share, or you can see how the trust level is affecting your conversations with the people in the community. And when you exit out of the menus, you can choose to keep talking to them or to completely skip the dialogue, which I think is nice to give that option there to the player. The fast travel system, I saw some people knacking that. I actually do like that a lot. Some people might call it a micromanage type thing, but I actually am kind of a sucker for that kind of stuff in games. I think, in terms of what kind of game they're trying to set up, it'd be kind of stupid if they had a fast travel system with a bike and they didn't have some sort of penalty to it where you have to use gas or you have to upgrade stuff. And I think it's just a cool concept. It's just something that, is it, kind of annoying that you have to travel to this place before you can go to that place because you don't have enough fuel? Maybe, but there's so much fuel around, and you kind of want to stop at these other locations anyway to check in on quests and stuff. So I don't think it's that big of an issue, but I know some people might fault it. Getting onto the gameplay aspect, it does have a very slow start. Not very slow, but it is a bit slower paced. They definitely restrict you, and they don't force you, but they kind of incentivize you to kind of do some story stuff before you really get out there in the world, because you face a lot of enemies and you die pretty fast, and you're going to need a lot of ammo, which you won't have at the beginning. I would say that there is some tweaks, as it's not as polished or as smooth running as some other games that come out, especially exclusive-wise, but I think it's still great fun. And after 7 to 8 hours, a lot of the stuff that you might have had gripes about, you're not going to have as many gripes before, because you're going to have more stuff to approach your things. And a lot of the reasons why it is a bit more frustrating at the beginning is because of the scaling. There is no area that scales to your level. So, they have to make it to where, if you're a late game and you're going back to the same area and you got all this shit that you didn't have before, they got to have some way to balance that out, you know what I mean? So it's not too easy when you come back. So I think, looking at it a little bit later in the game, I actually did like that little bit of a difficulty curve. So I would say that's still fine there. Like I said, you get a variety of options. There's a bunch of different guns. There's a bunch of different crafting systems. And consumables you can make. I wouldn't say it's the biggest variety, but I think it's definitely enough, and I found myself enjoying all of the ones that they did offer. The Freakers, I gotta say, I love the Freakers in this game. It's been a long time. I haven't played many zombie games, and let me rephrase that. I've played a lot of zombie games. I haven't played a lot recently, just because there hasn't been that many coming out. And, it's nice to see that, with a zombie-like game coming out, that it brings some fear back into the zombies. I can think of a couple games that I really thought that they did that, and then there's been a couple where I'm like, Dead Rising is a perfect example. And there's a lot of zombies, but you're not really afraid of like seeing a massive horde because you know you can take them out really easily. And this, I think, because it has that horde mechanic, it is a good thing to say that when you sit there and you see like maybe a group of like 200 of them, which by any means is not a big number of freakers in this game, you kind of have to be like, I gotta check and make sure I got enough stuff, which I love that. And there's plenty of times you'll go up against a horde and you're like, I don't have enough. I can't do this, and you're gonna have to run away. So I like that. I like that there's enough difficulty factor that you got to add some strategy in there. You got to lay down some traps. It's really nice to see that. The skill tree is a little bit bland. I'll just come out and say it. I don't want to sit here and ramble on about what I think could make it better because it's like a done deal. But it's pretty generic. And there isn't many unique ones. There is some cool unique ones, but they're the lower end of the bunch. You're gonna see a lot of more like damage boosts and you can retrieve stuff and things like of that nature. And the last thing I'll say about gameplay: stealth missions are atrocious sometimes. If you do it, it's. If you are lucky enough to get through it the first time, you probably won't even notice it, but they punish you hard for messing up. They'll reset the whole mission and you have to start from the beginning, which I think some of the AI a little bit, at least on the human aspect, is a tad bit broken. Granted, there is one skill you can get that lowers like the way that you can be detected. So if you have that, it probably isn't as bad, but I didn't. So, I don't think I'm a bad player. I'm sure everybody would say that, but I think people would agree that at least, some of the checkpoints could have been a little bit tweaked on that to make it a little bit nicer experience. Now, one thing, we're going to get into kind of an ugly section here, and that is the graphical and performance issues. I'm not somebody that is really picky about how beautiful or how bad a game looks. Obviously, if it's running like an Xbox or PS1 game on a PS4 and it's made for the PS4, I'd be like, hang on now. But, I'm pretty flexible of what I say is all right. But this game definitely has some issues. I have a list here actually because I wrote them down. Lighting is sometimes off, which I think is pretty prevalent because if you go through the game, this is just a small little thing, but if you go through the game, you probably will be like, you won't really notice it, but I'll tell you what, if you walk through the game, just kind of notice how it's lit and everything. And then, go into the photo mode or go to the watchtower thing is like your first base when you start the game. Go up there when the sun is setting or something like that, and you'll notice a huge difference. For some reason, it just looks 10 times better there. That's a little bit other one, but there is some other things here. Cut animations and where it stops the animation mid-string or whatever, and then there's also some slight fails to rendering, it didn't quite catch up, which was frame rates and stuff like that. I had clipping. I even had one thing where my bike was sitting, and typically if you have a group of freakers come by, they knock over the bike and then they walk on it. I had one freaker walk next to my bike and it sent it flying 500 feet in the air, crashed down, completely broke my bike, and so that was kind of annoying because I had no scrap on me at the time because I had already repaired it and there was only one freaker left and I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal, but then something like that happened. So there is some things in there that I experienced that are it's kind of bad. I'm getting into my final thoughts. We're going to shut this down. The story, circling back, it's nothing to cry home about, but it is still still entertaining enough. You're going to get some enjoyment out of it. Between Deacon and the other characters, sorry, I was just saying here, I was trying to make out what the fuck I wrote. They make it worth it with coped with their performance, and then also kind of like how their journey goes on a more personal level. You get to see something that is, still enjoyable and a nice takeaway. The gameplay, I think, is where it really shines. It's fun, fast-paced, and it does great in, bringing strategy and a sense of, like, fear with the freakers and, like, the hordes that can, surround you. I would say the world is very fun to explore. It's really cool with the drifting with the bike. The bike feels amazing, so that was probably one of my main worries since it's such a big focus, and I think they nailed that pretty good. There is some outstanding moments, but there is like I said, it's mostly in the gameplay that you'll find the enjoyment. There is some minor repetitiveness, but I think, that's kind of what it's made for, because it's setting you up for this and then trying to make you do it again and again until you can finally tackle it and win it. So, that's kind of it there. Because of the graphic and performance issues, I will say, all the stuff I mentioned, those aren't things that I think are really breaking for a game. But, the game did get delayed for a year. Let's not forget this. It got delayed a year, and they promised that they would, delay it to fix these issues. And they're still there, and they're still really prominent. If it was just a little thing here and there, I'd probably, still be okay with it. But, the fact that it's delayed and we got this many issues is kind of unacceptable. So that pegged it down a little bit in my book. But, even though I think it's probably one of the weakest exclusives that I played, it's still worth the $60 price tag for me. That's why I gotta give it gotta have it, 8 out of 10. I think it's extremely fun. If you're just looking for something, to have a lot of fun with, mess around, sink a few hours in, it is a game that I think you will appreciate, and it's honestly one of the funnest zombie games I've played, or zombie-esque games. I'll keep this, lore friendly. So I would say if you're a friend of that genre too, you should definitely check it out, because I think you'll have a lot of fun with this. But anyway, guys, that will conclude this review, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace, guys.